morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to Chapter 13, the never-ending chapter. We're talking about evolution still, and we've talked about how evolution happens within populations, that an individual does not evolve. A population evolves. Within a population, you've got a bunch of different genes. Each individual has their own set of genes, and they share lots of genes in common, but each one will have slightly different genes, like we talked about in lab, like light eyes versus dark eyes, like widow's peak versus not. Different features. In having these different genes, which lead to different features, within a population you have a bunch of different genes, and this is referred to as the gene pool. The gene pool is all of the genes in a particular population of individuals. Natural selection works on that gene pool by editing out the genes that don't fit, by editing out the genes that aren't good for the environment in which that population is found. If you were to pick up that population and put it somewhere else, that gene might be fine, that gene might work great, but that population isn't somewhere else. That population is here, and being here, that gene has to work here, and if it doesn't, it gets edited out. Edited out means the individual carrying that gene dies. Microevolution is the change in the relative frequency of alleles in a population over generations. It is evolution on its smallest scale, and that's what we're talking about. Evolution on its smallest scale, like the pesticide spraying. That's editing out genes that don't fit, and that's changing the frequency of genes in that population of bugs in that area. Microevolution. Microevolution is how natural selection impacts the genes in a particular population. There are, within natural selection can lead to two different events called genetic drift and gene flow. We've already talked about gene flow. Gene flow is the sharing of genes between different areas. If this population and that population are exchanging individuals, she moves from Hawkinsville to Eastman and marries a man in Eastman, that is gene flow between those two populations. If this person moves from Macon to Valdosta and they get married and have babies together, that is gene flow. That is sharing genes between separate populations. If he comes from Africa and she comes from China and they get married together in America, that is gene flow. That is exchanging of genes between different populations. Genetic drift, we'll talk about it in just a second. Genetic drift is when chance events cause changes in the gene pool by editing out certain frequencies. There are two basic forms of genetic drift, and they have similar effects, but the cause of each is quite different. The similar effect is, in both of these cases, you have a population of just a few individuals that all interact and breed together, and over many generations become a large population of individuals. The two different conditions are, with the bottleneck effect, the reason why this small group of individuals is living and breeding together is because everybody else died. And the only reason why they lived, the only reason why they are giving birth to all of the future generations is because they're the only ones that survived. The bottleneck effect. The population has gone through a very big bottleneck. There was a whole bunch of them. Very few of them survived, and then they gave birth to a bunch more over many generations. The other is called the founder effect, and it's the same idea, except that instead of all of the rest of the individuals dying, this small group of individuals colonized a new area and had no more contact or very little contact with the outside world. Imagine like people going and colonizing an island and then burning their boats when they got there, and now they can't go back, and nobody can come to them, and so they are now isolated. They're an isolated population, and so any of those mutations that show up in their population aren't going to be shared with the mainland, and more than that, mutations in the mainland are not going to make it to this isolated population. What's probably actually going to happen is you're going to have more change on the mainland than you actually have with this isolated population. The founder effect. They have founded a new colony, and because they have created this new colony and are separated, what can happen is that they will have, again, traits that show up, traits that occur in that population that we don't find in the parent population. This shows the bottleneck effect. If you look in this bottle, there are several different colors. There's purple marbles, green marbles, and orange marbles. With the bottleneck effect, a very few individuals survive some horrible catastrophe. And if you notice, we're going to take a few marbles and shake them into the glass. And when we do that, we find that we have a few purple marbles and one green. And if you notice over here, we had a relatively even distribution of green and purple. But now, because of this random bottleneck event, a bunch of individuals died for some reason. We don't have a good reason why. Only a few survived. No more oranges at all. Now this population is going to be significantly different because we have a significantly smaller group of genes. More than that, the percentage of greens versus purple is considerably different. And because it's considerably different, this resulting population that will go on and make new babies are going to be genetically, the percentages are going to be different because you've got a different group. This shows the bottleneck, like we talked about just a second ago. This shows the founder effect. So the founder effect is I have this large population of individuals. A small number of individuals branch off and go and found a new colony. And because they have created a new colony, they're not going to have any contact with the larger population. If it's a rich area where there's lots of resources, then they're going to do very well and have lots of babies. But any sort of changes that happen in the parent population, we're not going to see over here. And any kind of changes that might happen over here, we won't see in the parent population. One other thing with both of these events is that you tend to have lots of what's referred to as non-random mating. If a bunch of individuals are reduced down to very few individuals, then what happens after not very long is that finding mates that aren't related to you is difficult. The old joke about, rednecks marrying their sisters, right? Well, it comes from what were referred to as hillbillies. Hillbillies, another term for redneck, well, kind of, but not really. They were in the hills. And you have to think about when America was founded, when America was created, 250, 400 years ago, people had to get places one of two ways, walking or riding a horse. And so these people would get up into the hills, very difficult to climb up a mountain, and they'd find these wonderful mountain valleys. And in finding these beautiful mountain valleys, they're like, hey, this is a great place. Let's farm here. Let's live here. And when they get to these great places, it's hard to get down off of the mountain, and it's hard for more people to come up to where they are. So because they have come to a place that's difficult to get to, if only a couple, 3 or 4 families went up into this area, how long is it before, well, if this family marries with that family and this other family marries with that other family, after a couple of generations, if new people aren't coming up, if no one's coming down, it's really hard to find someone to marry that you're not related to. And you're going to marry what's available. And what's available turns out to be your cousin, a first cousin, or a second cousin. And so this is where we get this stereotype. This is where we get this joke of rednecks, of country people marrying, their relatives. Because in a lot of cases, that really wasn't an option. And you think, ha ha ha, those dumb, stupid hillbilly rednecks. Yeah, well, the royal families of Europe did it a lot too. And it wasn't that they were marrying cousins because there was no one else to marry. It's because they were royal. And who can a royal marry? Only another royal. So it's not that just country bumpkins did it. Really, really rich people did it too. Except they did it because they were snooty, not because they didn't have any other choice.